Wish We Could Turn Back Time by Girlinpink44. Chapter 19. Ragazzi Prestigio. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Tony flew in the suit, mixed feeling over his previous encounter with a man who had been his uncle, mentor, his godfather. A man he'd spent 15 years wondering why he did what he did. And wondering why he didn't see it sooner. He'd never fully appreciated the idea of hindsight being 20/20 until he'd woken up that day in the Afghani desert. And now his questions of things he missed grew. Especially how he had missed Stain grabbing his kids when he was well aware the man had out for him and had ordered at least one assassination attempt. The time stone certainly hadn't helped his peace of mind. Quentin Beck was one of the people currently holding Peter hostage, and while he wasn't the man who completely and utterly ruined Peter's life, Tony wasn't sure if he was above bashing in the face of a man for something he had yet to do. He was fairly certain Pepper would frown on that, at least until he told her what he had done in the future. Spider-Man's real! Spider-Man's real name is Peter Parker! He wanted to tear that man apart! At the very least, he wanted to completely and utterly ruin his life for the deed he hadn't done in this timeline. And not even God would be able to help Beck if anything happened to his sons. Jay, if by some chance he gets out of this before Peter ever decides to reveal he's enhanced, if that day comes, make sure we keep a careful eye on Beck. Of course, sir. Speaking of, he was spotted near the river in Hoboken, New Jersey. I'm currently tracking him through CCTV now, and hope that he will lead us to the boy's location. Tones, Rhodey cut in, I've got a source at the FBI, who took the Hoboken lead and ran with it. It turns out Stain owns a warehouse near the river. A development firm has been trying to get in contact with the owners as a part of their revitalizing of the waterfront efforts. I'm sending the coordinates to Jarvis now. I have them, Colonel Rhodes, preparing a route there. The Council has called and has confirmed that you have freedom to act within the US airspace. Thanks, Honey Bear. Tony saw the map pull up and saw he had about 20 minutes. Put Charles on the line for a second, would you? There was a pause and then Charles's calm voice. How can I help, Tony? I need you to tell me to have faith in the US justice system and not to ask you to help me take matters into my own hands. 7 years ago, Tony had fought with a man he had considered a close friend about trusting the system and how they couldn't take matters into their own hands. Then the world had ended and Peter had turned to dust in his arms. And then he'd died and come back to a world where answers he'd searched for so long were within reach. But it was a complete invasion of Stain's privacy to even ask Charles about it. Tony was quickly realizing that he had to practice what he had preached and trust that the system would help him get the answers he had sought. Tony. I know. It's completely irrational, and I'm well aware that I might not be in a state of rationale, which is slightly alarming considering how armed this multi-million-dollar suit is. Tony, it will be okay. You'll get them back. I have faith. We're boarding our jet and heading your way now. You won't be alone for too long. But I can't do what you asked. I know. I'll meet you there. I'll do recon on the area until you get close. We'll see you soon, Tony. Tony shut off the comms and flew in silence for a bit, sailing over the island of Manhattan. He took a few-minute detour and flew through Queens. Through Peter's neighborhood, through streets where he had flown with Peter while the kid was doing patrols. The press had loved the idea of it. It had been the most positive they had been towards him since before he had joined the Avengers. Well, maybe there was a time directly after the Battle of New York. Back when the world was so grateful they had been saved. So in shock at the reveal of the confirmation that life on other planets existed. Once, He'd allowed Stain to steer him into a world of zero accountability, and that crossed all areas of his life. Professionally, personally, publicly, privately. Then he'd gotten a wake-up call, and more than his fair share of near-death experiences. He circled around, found the warehouse in question. "Alright, Joe. We are running every scan this suit is capable of on that building. If they have security cameras, I want them in and out. Put them on a loop." "Give me a second, sir." Tony flew in circles. To the average person, they'd appear almost lazy. He was just high enough that most people would mistake him for a large drone. After all, this time wasn't used to Iron Man flying randomly around greater New York City area as they were in the future. Maybe that's something he'd do more of. Joyrides. It was freeing, flying as he did in the suit. "Sir, I have located Peter inside the warehouse." "Show me the feed, Joe." On the screen, Peter appeared, hooked up to a variety of wires. There was an IV in his arm. He was asleep but attached to a heart monitor. The feed showed Tony that he was okay. His right eye was a sickly yellow-green colour, thanks to his speed healing. A blanket covered his legs. Had it been different circumstances, it would almost look like Tony was peeking into a kid's hospital room. But the bars on the window told a different story. "And Harley? He's in the main room." The screen split, showing Harley from behind. There were shackles on his ankles, a cot a few feet away. He was at a work table, hunched over something. A screen sat nearby, showing live footage of Peter. Tony's throat closed up as he asked, "Do we have another angle? I want to see what he's working on." "Yes, there's another camera." The view switched. A drone sat on the table in front of Harley as he was taking it apart. Dozens of pieces lay there. Beck stood a few feet away, staring at a computer monitor. An arc reactor sat on the table, probably a backup for Stain's suit, definitely made by Harley. Tony's blood began to boil. It looked like they were threatening Harley with Peter. Logically, if he didn't take Peter's enhancement into account, that was the logical choice. It took no time for Harley to get as attached to Peter as he was to his own sister. And if they knocked Peter out to take him, and kept him sedated the whole time, they unknowingly kept the biggest threat to their plan as a non-issue. Tony wondered how they'd worked around his metabolism. Or perhaps at his young age, it was closer to an adult, and these idiots didn't realise something was off. It was an avenue to study as he continued to work to recreate Peter's meds. Yet another thing on his list he'd neglected because he thought he had more time. The kid was supposed to be a kid in Queens, play with his best friend as the duo embraced the second round of childhood. "Tony? You close, honey bear?" "We're landing about half a mile away on top of a parking garage." Tony saw the jet and rushed over to land nearby as the group deplaned and circled around. "According to Jay's recon, there's a dozen mercenaries in there, as well as many scientists." "I suspect the latter will surrender shortly after we take care of the former," Charles nodded. "I've got a backup of their systems in case they try to dump things on their way out. That's ready for whoever wins the jurisdictional rights." He raised his helmet and looking at his new teammates. It felt odd, working together as a team for this fight. A fight where he had been previously alone. A change. But a good one, perhaps. "I think the fates will, considering 4 different states are involved." "At least I'm not the direct subject of the investigation this time," Tony shrugged. "You guys go in on the ground. I'll provide support from the air and pick up any stragglers." Brody nodded. "The FBI are currently forming a perimeter at a 3-block radius. We will make sure this happens as clean as possible." Magneto nodded. "But we are the ones entering." They turned him another nod. We are setting a standard here. For the first time in 30 years, enhanced individuals are openly participating in an operation that is very public. If you are not comfortable with this, then I suggest you turn back now. Magneto crossed his arms. I've always wanted to do what is best for our people. Far too long we have been relegated to the shadows, and tried to hide who we are and our gifts. If Charles is right, and this can help our cause, then I would be a fool to not be a part of it. Tony lowered his helmet. Let's move out. Once the building is secured, there will be nothing that stops me getting to my boys. Rhodey, we will need a medic on standby. One that's willing to sign an NDA. Jay, send a snapshot of the footage to his phone. Rhodey pulled out his phone and looked at it, hissing when he saw his nephew on the bed. I'm on it. Tony took to the skies as the others moved out, Charles's wheelchair moving pretty fast. Perhaps he had one specifically made for missions. Maybe when this was over, he should sit down with his new allies and learn more about their pasts. Charles, Hank and Logan were entering through the back door, with Rhodey and Magneto in the front. Tony flew about 100 feet in the air, looking at heat signatures in the one-story building. Despite his deep need to be in there on the ground with the team, he was well aware that his self-control would give out when he faced with the people who would help take and harm his children. Part of being a part of this new team was learning that he couldn't, and perhaps shouldn't, take everything on himself. He had to trust them, even with something as important as Peter and Harley. Even with Rhodey being the only one to know just how far Tony was willing to go for his kids. Logan, you've got your heat signature about 5 meters away from you around that corner. Rhodey, you've got one about 7. He watched the heat signatures react. Jay, tag Halsey's and Peter's positions in the building for me, so I can see when someone comes close. Right away, sir. There were 2 new dots on his HUD, and he observed them. Charles, you're about 20 meters from Peter. It looks like you take a right at the fork in the hallway, and he's the 3rd door on the right. Of course. Magneto, you're the closest to Harley. Logan, you're almost there on the other side. About half the mercenaries were taken out, subdued and being extracted by agents who were backup for the core team. The other half were between the team and the main room, with most of the science staff being inside. I've got Peter, Tony, though I hesitate to move him without a medic present. Charles's voice came over the comms, and Tony let out a breath of relief. One son was safe. And Tony? He's okay, dreaming of working with you in the lab. He's going to grow up to be a fine young man. Tony smiled at the idea of Peter's dreams being of the lab days they had. Thank you, Charles. One by one, the hostile heat signatures were subdued. Once Tony was certain the building was secured, he landed near the back door and stepped out of the suit. Rushing down the hall, he made his way to the room Peter was in. Kneeling beside the bed, he ran his hands through the kid's curls. I've got you, Rue. Placing a kiss on his forehead, he went to check on his other kid. Neither Magneto nor Logan had reported. A medic walked by him and to Peter. Have you been told? I've signed an NDA. What's so important about your son? He's enhanced, including his metabolism. I've started running tests, but it's something I'm not willing to subject him to. He'll burn off meds faster than normal, so I've no idea how they compensated with the dosage. The woman paused. I won't tell anyone. Tony nodded and made a note to follow up if she did a good job keeping Peter safe here. They could always use more medical staff that were open to dealing with enhanced individuals. Charles's students deserved people. Peter deserved people. Tony, we need you in the main room. Tony took off and arrived to see Beck holding his other son at gunpoint. Harley was staring dead ahead, blue eyes wide as the metal pushed against his hair. I'm going to ask you to put that gun down now. And you're going to stop me? Beck sneered at him, tightening his grip and making Harley wince. Tony, I'm sorry.
I didn't want to help.
Tony looked at his kid, who was shaking like a leaf. There's no apologies needed, kid. I've got you. Do you, Stark? The gun seemed to move closer. Suddenly, the gun flew out of his hands and landed on the ground. Safety clicking on. Magneto casually walked into the room. He's not alone, you know. Rhodey walked up, cuffs in his hands, but Tony held up his hands. Honey bear, I would like to handle this one, if you don't mind. Call him petty, but he wanted to be the one to cuff back. Not just for what he did in a timeline that no longer existed, but for everything that had happened today to both of his boys. Revenge or vengeance? It was a delicate line that Tony walked sometimes. And honestly, he wasn't sure what side he was on of it at the moment. But securing the cuffs to the hands of Quentin Beck was one of the most satisfying things he had done in a long time. A swarm of agents walked into the room and began processing it as one came over and led Beck away. Before he could turn, he had a boy clinging to him. Bending down, he picked up Harley. Hey, it's okay. I've got you, Pedetino. Harley clung to him, seeming to seek out physical affection in a way he had never done before. But they'd never been in a situation like this before, when they were as close. The kid usually was standoffish, a stark contrast to Peter, who sometimes imitated a koala, especially on movie nights.
Mechanic! I didn't want to!
He sniffed, and Tony felt his heart break at how scared his eldest was. I know. It's okay. We're okay. You're okay. Tony held the boy closer. I've got you. The boys were having nightmares. Tony wasn't even sure they were going to work things out logistically with the boys being in two states, yet neither wanting him to be more than a few feet away at any given point. They were hiding away in his Malibu mansion, with the boys doing their schoolwork remotely. Any time Tony went to Stark Industries' office, there were a swarm of paparazzi, press, and curious bystanders that had questions, ranging from the condition of the boys, those he appreciated, to what exactly happened. At the moment, he was sitting in his office. Rhodey sat in a chair, Happy in another. Remember all those years ago, where I said I wanted to stop being a part of a system with no accountability? Yeah, at that press conference. The one where I started to get grey hairs. Happy crossed his arms. To be fair, that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I did a lot of stupid things leading to that point. S.H.I.E.L.D's been sniffing around. The council has stopped them for now, but I won't be surprised if a certain spider shows up. Tony scoffed. If that spider thinks she's getting near my spider, she's got another thing coming. Both of the men nodded. What's your playtones? Rhodey eyed his best friend. Are you going to announce yourself as the first superhero since Captain America? Leaning back in his chair, Tony winced. I wish I was enough of a bigger person, then yet another comparison of me to Steve Rogers didn't annoy me as much as it did. But here I sit. It's okay to be mad at him. Technically, he hasn't done any of the things I'm mad at. The rest is more issues with Howard than with Steve. And we need him. Both men in front of him looked as if they were going to protest, but Tony held up his hand. We do. Thanos is coming and we need all hands on deck, this time around. Now, I'm not going to be buddy-buddy with him, but I could do without the so-called Civil War. So, work with them but not be an Avenger? Tony, getting up, stared out of the window. The name itself was born out of loss. Though, if you talk to Fury, it was from the call sign of an old friend of his. But I told Loki that day in the tower that if we couldn't defend the Earth, we could avenge it. If anything, that name fits. We lost.
Even in victory, we lost. But this time we can win. We can stop it. Save everyone.
Tony turned to his two friends.
There's no other option. Whatever decision I make here will lay the groundwork for what's to come. I am transparent again and paint a target on all of our backs? Or do I attempt to have a secret identity and know it will blow up in my face?
I think you should tell people again, Happy spoke up. Sure, it's a security nightmare, and yes, it paints a target on our backs.
But you know that no one on your team, especially the ones of us from the future, will let that stop us. I agree with Happy, Tones. But I'll back your play either way.
Pepper walked into the room. You've gotten at least 100 missed calls from various members of the press, asking for information about what happened. We can't hold them off much longer. They're starting sniffing around the boys soon enough. Tony froze at the idea of the press coming after the boys. It was bad enough the press Peter would have gotten in a timeline that never happened, but the world didn't know about his connection to the boy. If they had, they would have made things so much worse. There was a lot that followed Tony. Mistakes he had made. Mistakes he had yet to make in this timeline. There were expectations that were placed on him that had been so long since before he could comprehend them. And he wouldn't let that happen to his boys.
Pepper, call a press conference. They want something to talk about? I'll give them something to talk about.
She eyed him for a second. You're coming clean.
It'll distract the press from the kids. We can introduce them properly at the gala next month.
She nodded. I'll have it ready in an hour.
Thanks, Pep.
Tony smiled at his fiancée as she walked out of the door of the office. The two press conferences that Tony had always felt defined the man he'd become. There was one he had done for the second time a few weeks ago, and there was the one that was about to begin in the room next door. At least this time, Pepper wasn't putting makeup on him because he was beaten up from almost getting his ass handed to him by Stain. Coulson wasn't handing him cards full of lies that he almost readily read aloud to the world. But then he had remembered what he had said. Accountability. His weapons had been solved everywhere, with no input from him. Because he'd let Stain do whatever he wanted, so Tony could do whatever he wanted. There were times where he hated that about his former self. Then, almost a decade later, he chose accountability again.